Well, I was very wrong. I expressed some concern in the previous video, if you'll remember, about the idea that the relationship between Ciri and Susebron was maybe heading in like a Beauty and the Beast direction. Like it was going, like, you know, he's like this extremely powerful man who's kind of above her, and she's gonna fall for him, and he's gonna fall for her, and yada yada yada. And no, that's not where that was heading at all, because literally in the next chapter, I think, that I read after filming that video, we got the reveal of Susebron's actual situation, which is horrifying and fascinating. And this book immediately skyrocketed, for me personally, from being the thus far least interesting Cosmere story I've encountered to the most interesting. During this middle section of the book that I've now read, my opinion of this book has risen so much. The writing has also improved. I had some concerns about the prose in the first part. I think those were unwarranted. I think that was just an anomaly, like a couple of awkward phrases that I noticed. Because in this second part, the writing is back on the level I expect of Sanderson. Really, all of my concerns just evaporated during this section because it's so good. So we have several interesting storylines going on in parallel here. One is everything going on at the Court of Gods, and the other is everything going on with Vivenna. Sorry, my brain stopped for a moment there. So let's start with the Vivenna storyline, actually, because that one's interesting. So the last thing that happened in this section that I just read is the reveal that the mercenaries have been working against her the whole time. Dent, Tonkfa, and Jules. I find this interesting and also more surprising than I should, because it was kind of obvious. Like, Dent is honest. He did straight up tell her that he was gonna betray her at some point. But I think because it was so obvious, it was difficult to predict, because I thought for sure that the whole point was gonna be that they were going to be the most loyal people imaginable, despite being mercenaries. But no, they did in fact betray her. It's still not clear who they're working for. We'll see. I'm guessing probably not the government of Halandren, because the government of Halandren shouldn't know Vivenna is here. So I'm curious who their employers are. I'm also curious now about Vasher, because this paints Vasher as a potentially heroic character. Like, is he just like an asshole, like a gruff and rough kind of guy who was actually trying to rescue Vivenna from her actual kidnappers, Dent and Tonkfa and Jules? If so, that would be interesting. He does seem hesitant to kill people. Like, he doesn't love murdering people, if he can avoid it. Which is more than can be said for Dent and Tonkfa. So I think Vasher might turn out to be a kind of good guy, or at least anti-hero, I suppose. Now, Lightsong had a vision while looking at a painting of a woman holding a black sword. The black sword is obviously Nightblood, Vasher's sword, and the woman, I suspect, is Vivenna. At the start of the book, the obvious choice would have been Ciri, because Ciri is the far, far likelier sister to wield a sword out of the two. But now I think it's going to be Vivenna, because I think the arc of these two sisters' character development, interestingly enough, is that they are going towards each other's starting positions, where Ciri started as the less feminine, more rambunctious, more rebellious one, and Vivenna started as the super traditionally feminine, obedient one. And now, while the part where Ciri is rebellious and rambunctious is not changing, her gender expression is. She's growing her hair longer. She's learning to love wearing fancy dresses and sort of enjoying her time at court, and sort of the political intrigue side of things. Whereas Vivenna, who was actually trained for life at court, is learning to be like essentially a survivor, a warrior, even. So I wouldn't be surprised if by the end of this, the two sisters are basically the opposites of each other, just like they were at the start, but now they're going to be the opposite of each other in the opposite directions. Which is a cool arc. I like that. It's slightly cliche, but I like it. So that's it for my thoughts of Vivenna. Now let's look at the Court of God situation. So, first of all, a theory. Are the returned just very advanced lifeless? Because that's kind of the vibe I'm getting from the returned, to be honest. I think that the returned might just be lifeless, but like a special kind of lifeless. Maybe they are the phantoms, like the super special lifeless that were invented during the Many War, that no one remembers exactly what they were. Maybe those are actually what the returned are. I am curious to see how that goes, because the returned, I suspect, might not be a naturally occurring phenomenon. Now, this is counteracted by the fact that we know that there was at least one naturally occurring returned in Idris that Ciri and Vivenna, or one of them at least, remembers from when she was a girl. So maybe they are a naturally occurring thing, but I suspect currently that they are being artificially produced. What else is going on here? Yeah, so the reveal of Susebron's situation, the fact that he has no tongue, the fact that he was never taught how to read, the fact that he's basically a slave to his own priests. That's fascinating. I love the idea of gods who are essentially just as much victims of their own priesthood as the common people are. It's a really interesting concept, and I'm curious to see how it gets resolved. My prediction right now is that someone, probably Lightsong, is going to sacrifice himself, give his life, to heal Susebron's tongue, would be my guess. Because supposedly a Lightsong sacrificing themselves can heal a single person of anything. And then Susebron will be able to use his powers and do something crazy. That's the current prediction. What else is going on here? So the relationship between Ciri and Susebron is really cute and sweet and makes me sad, because there's no way it doesn't end in tragedy, because even if they somehow get out of Halandron and become free and even go back to Idris, Susebron will only live for a week without his weekly infusion of breath from the populace. So I don't think Ciri has realized that yet, but the relationship is doomed, unfortunately, which is tragic. But it's nice watching it play out, and sweet, even if it is slightly darkened by the knowledge that there's no way this story has a happy ending for the two of them. Even though it would be really nice if it did. There's also the reveal here that the gods have an average lifespan of just 10 years, which, assuming that they return after their deaths and that they died usually, not as very old people, probably, that means that, like, cumulatively, even if you add up their god lifetime and their human lifetime, the vast majority of gods have much shorter lives than the vast majority of humans in Halandren. Which is interesting, because the gods are considered immortal, and they technically are, but they also live much shorter than the humans. That's it's interesting there, like the way the word immortal is used to mean something very different than what we expect it to mean. What else here? Yeah, there's really only three other things I have to say about this section before we move on. One, Vasher and Nightblood refer to Denth as Vera Trelades, and Trelades is the name of the high priest of Susebron, who I'm assuming is the main antagonist of this book, basically. So I don't know what the link there is. I don't know what the Vara prefix means. What Vara Trelades means. We'll see. But there's definitely a link there. That can't be an accident on Brandon's part. That seems weird. The second thing I noticed is that Brandon continues his sort of theme of religion and talking about how different religions can be compatible, and how just because you believe in one religion doesn't mean that you have to think other religions are wrong. This strikes me as probably something that emerges from his upbringing as a Mormon. I'm guessing that Mormonism being very conservative, he probably grew up being taught that there was only one true faith, and he sort of rebelled against that. That's the vibe I'm getting from this. It sort of reminds me of how Andrei Sapkowski writes about religion, and how the way he writes about religion is clearly a response to the, let's say, situation with the Catholic Church in Poland. So I do find that interesting in a sort of like authorial analysis kind of way, I guess. And the other thing I've noticed is that we are continuing, unfortunately, even with multiple female characters in this book, we are continuing the unfortunate trend that female characters in Sanderson's books tend to be allowed to question their gender, to sort of have these crises of identity tied to their gender, which both Fury and Vivenna have to a lesser or greater extent, whereas male characters do not. Male characters never think about the fact that they are male and what that means. And in a different book, that same thing could be commentary on the way that society has a double standard for men and women, but unfortunately, the vibe I get from Sanderson is that in his writing, it is more an example of that double standard in action, rather than commentary on it, which is unfortunate. I've made my peace with that, but I am going to keep pointing it out, because that's what I do here. I analyze these books like that. So it's definitely a trend, and it's kind of weird how consistent of a trend it is, like in all three Cosmere stories so far. If it's also in Way of Kings and Mistborn Era 2, I will be very amused, frankly. At this point, I just find it funny how consistent it is. Okay, yeah. I am going to go and finish, probably, this book. I don't think I'll be making more than one more video on this one. I am very excited to see how this one plays out, because it feels like we are so far away from a conclusion, and yet the book is like 2/3 done, I think? So we'll see how this goes. See you next time.